Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for having James Bradley on this evening. My name is Susanna Scheel, and I am the campaign manager for the James P. Bradley campaign. I am in the district, and we have a business in the district, and we have a vested interest in making sure that this district is successful. So Mr. Bradley is running for the 33rd congressional seat in California against Ted Lieu. We are honored to say that we have been endorsed by many of our Republican brothers and sisters. Most importantly, though, one of the world-renowned scientists and filmmakers, Dr. Andrew Wakefield, the Parents' Voice USA, mayor of Palos Verdes, the Women and Men, the Women's Club, the Women's Tarzana Republican Association, as well as the South Bay, and a legendary actor by the name of John Voight, and many others. Recently, a meeting with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's on the other side, has, but again, this is the beauty of what James brings to the table. He crosses those lines. He is standing up with Mr. Kennedy around the health freedom movement, and he is going to aggressively work with Mr. Kennedy and others in the health freedom movement to repeal and reverse this 1986 act. He is personally has experienced what this act has done to his family. As a decorated Coast Guard search and rescue veteran who has served our country under President Ronald Reagan, one of his legends, he stands with faith, family, and freedoms, including our parental and individual health freedoms, including parental freedoms in school choices. He's spent over 30 years in healthcare in various roles, modernizing and improving medical systems and helping to implement visionary plans like telemedicine, which today it makes it easier for patients to reach their physicians remotely and economically. Hallmarks of Mr. Bradley's leadership platform include being a constitutionalist. He is a conservative, strong advocate for veterans, is definitely pro-law and order, pro-life, and pro-parental health rights, as we discussed, that I just brought up. Mr. Bradley proudly stands with Israel. And as President Trump, he applauds moving Tel Aviv, the embassy, to Jerusalem. And locally, James Bradley plans to aggressively resolve our homeless crisis that is metastasizing and plaguing the District 33 through lowering taxes and also incentive programs. James Bradley wants to stop the hundreds of thousands of people and businesses leaving California, and helps to improve on the infrastructure and keeping our beautiful coastal waters and beaches from beautiful Malibu to majestic Palos Verdes clean. Mr. Bradley believes California the district has so much limitless potential, given our Silicon Beaches, hundreds of technology startups, and our many universities and think tanks to help make our district golden again. I am so proud to be a volunteer and one of Mr. Bradley's largest donors. And we welcome anybody, even with the 2 weeks left, to please join this movement to take back our district. Mr. Bradley's philosophy is that collectively, united we stand, and together we win. So please make sure that you vote come the election date or anytime beforehand. And please feel free to go to bradleycongress.com and join our movement and possibly donate. And now, with no further ado, I'd like to hand it over to you, Mr. Ishagan, and take it from there.
Good evening. My name is Juben Eshagian, and I would like to welcome you to our program tonight. First, I'd like to add that my remarks do not represent anyone or any organization. They are my thoughts and my opinions only. Also, there's no intention for any fundraising or endorsing at all. I would also like to thank Mrs. Shiva Shamuil for introducing us to Mr. James Bradley. Shiva Shamuil is a political activist appearing in social medias on a daily basis. Mr. Bradley, we are glad to have you with us tonight. Let's start by going over the propositions. I would like to start with Proposition 25, bail and felons. What are the implications if Proposition 25 is passed?
Thank you for the question, and welcome everyone. It's quite an honor and a privilege to be with you this evening. Specific to Proposition 25, this is a referendum on state law, Senate Bill 10, that eliminate cash bail and replaced it with an algorithm system-based judging risk, specifically the risk of an arrested person and what they pose to public safety, and the risk that that person failed to show up at court for the appearance. So the basic opponents of this law qualified a referendum SB 5 to not take effect. A yes vote would be in favor of a law going into effect. A no vote would mean you do not want this law to go into effect. The Proposition 25 would result in immense new cost to the counties. Of course, our county and District 33. The new system is a risk-based model technology instead of a cash bail, and it would cost taxpayers in the mid of hundreds of millions of dollars, according to a legislative analyst. It's not clear where this money will come from. The huge cost of time and effort when the counties are already struggling to meet the financial obligations is not acceptable. My recommendations is no on Proposition 25.
Mr. Bradley, if Proposition 25 is passed, does that mean a criminal can just walk out of the jail without even having to post bail?
That is clear. That's correct.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to Proposition 20. Penalties for felons. Please elaborate on that.
Okay, this is Proposition 20.
Restricts payroll for certain offenses currently considered to be nonviolent. So we actually, go ahead, James.
No, please go ahead and join. But remember, this is a collaborative effort between Suzanne and I, she being the campaign manager, also a good brain trust to the campaign. We work collaboratively as we will with the community, so I want you to know, get to work. We're in DC. We're going to expect a lot from you.
Well, we stand in support of this bill, sir, and the reason is it limits access to parole program established for nonviolent offenders who have completed a full term of their primary offense by eliminating eligibility for certain offenses. So Prop 20 puts restrictions on the ability to apply for parole for specific nonviolent crimes. It partially reverses Proposition 47, which empowered calculator wielding thieves to repeatedly steal up to 950 of merchandise. You know, that whole, what is called grab and dash, if you will. Prop 20 would also reverse part of Proposition 57, which prematurely release nonviolent criminals, including but not limited to domestic abusers, sex traffickers, which is a huge problem in this district, and arsonists. So we stand in support of this bill.
Yeah, we're part of our campaign, so you know clearly, being in law enforcement, I was in the Coast Guard. For everyone there, our border security is paramount. We've seen the sex trade, the human trafficking, as well as drug trafficking coming across the border. So we are in full support of our wall, the border protection, being from that guild, if you will. So this will put a stem to this, the drug trafficking and sex trafficking.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bradley. Proposition 23, more restrictions on dialysis clinics. Would you please elaborate on that?
Well, this is right up on my alley because I've been in healthcare for quite a few years. we firmly oppose that. It requires the physician, nurse practitioner, or a physician assistant to be on site during the dialysis treatment. As you know, there's quite a few industries and companies that work in that trade, and that would basically increase the cost to provide those services on an outpatient basis. As it already stands, there's already roughly about 80,000 Californians with kidney failure, and they rely on dialysis to stay alive. Now, Prop 23 puts dialysis patients' lives at risk in all California by making us wait to see our doctors and increasing healthcare costs by hundreds of millions of dollars annually, as well as force many community clinics to shut down. And we're not in a position of shutting down business. We're about promoting business, increasing the small startups in mid-sized businesses. So it's a firmly against Proposition 23.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. Proposition 24, Consumer Privacy Law. Mr. Bradley, does this cause more liabilities, more red tapes for small businesses? What are your thoughts on that?
It does cause a shifts the cost burden onto the employers. What it does, it permits consumers to protect businesses from sharing personal information, correct or incorrect personal information, including precise geolocation. What that is your location within where you are. It's kind of a tracking mechanism. Race, ethnicity, in health, and information. Prop 24 reduces our privacy, the rights in California. It allows pay for privacy schemes, as you've seen over the last 10 years now, pay for play schemes through the Democrat Party. What will actually it make workers wait years to learn what confidential information employers collect on them, and it makes it harder for them to stop tech giants from selling this information or similar information to the privacy laws passed in the European Union of May 2018. So we're firmly against that in protection of our privacies.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. Proposition 21, rent control. If it passes, will it discourage builders and contractors from building apartments, and will this lead to a housing shortage?
It will. It actually stops new housing from being built, eliminates homeowners' protections while providing protections for renters, seniors, veterans, and disabled. Not to say we don't have to have protections for them, but the burden being on those current landowners and homeowners, it will be much, much greater. So it also allows local governments to establish rent control on residential properties over 15 years old. Local limits, rate increases may differ statewide. So we're firmly against Prop 21.
And again, it's because it's going to make the housing crisis worse. That is why we're against this one.
Exactly. Thank you, Mr. Bradley, and thank you, Susanna. Okay, Proposition 19, property taxes. This
Oh, no.
This happens to be controversial.
Yes.
To comment on that, Mr. Bradley.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first off, Proposition 19 takes away important taxpayer protections that have been enshrined by the state constitution since 1986. That's when 76 voters approved Proposition 58 to allow parents to transfer a home and limited other property to the children without an increase in property taxes. Proposition 19, it's 19, correct?
Yes.
19. Eliminates Proposition 58. Be simple. So what this does, a transferring of unless that child lives in the household for a year, but most do not, obviously. So what it does, it adjusts the property value to current market. It does away with those protections of guarantee a tax rate at date of purchase, as well as this affects the law that went into effect years ago that protected grandparents passing that property to the grandchildren. So it's firmly against Proposition 19. Is there anything you want to add, Susanna?
No, I think you covered it all. I think you covered it all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Susanna, and thank you, Mr. Bradley. Okay, Proposition 18. It's 17-year-olds voting. What are your concerns on that?
Well, they're still in high school for one. More importantly, they'll be voting on proposition or bills that will affect our tax base. So without having some experience in life, they'll be making life and decisions on taxation against our property as well as businesses. So we're firmly against it. We believe that we should allow them a little time to grow so they understand fiscal responsibility. But yeah, that's.
And the law prohibits younger teens from, smoking, drinking, and, even tanning, because research shows that the logic and reasoning area of the brain is not fully developed. Mm-hmm. So those abilities are vitally, vital to responsible voting. And I've been talking to very many young 14, 15, 16-year-olds, and they're just parroting what they're hearing on the cancel culture, the radio, in their hip hop music. And it's dangerous. The indoctrination of some of our schools are getting to these young without them having some life experience. So not that 18 gives them that life experience, but it does. That's when you're legally an adult. So we definitely are opposing Prop 18.
Thank you. Good points. Okay. Proposition 16. I'm sorry, Proposition 17. Voting right for past felons. It gives equal rights for felons and ordinary citizens to vote. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, the 17 you mentioned?
Yes.
Yes.
That restores the voting rights upon completion of a prison term to persons who are disqualified from voting for serving prison term. Proposition 17 amends the California Constitution to grant violent criminals, the right to vote before completing their sentence, including parole. It would allow criminals convicted of heinous crimes like murder, rape, and child molestation to vote before paying their debt to society. And it denies justice to those victims of the crimes. So we are firmly opposed to Proposition 17.
You must do your time before you get to have your rights back to be a part of society again. You must do your time.
Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, Mr. Bradley. Proposition 16, diversity in public employment. What are the consequences on that?
Well, that is, affirmative action. I don't know if you've been around, some of you may have been around for several years. That went into effect during the Kennedy administration. And then we had a Proposition 209 that reversed that didn't discriminate against race, color, creed. Proposition 16 reverses that, Proposition 209, putting us back quite a few decades into affirmative action. This, I spoke at one rally opposing Prop 16 with many of our Asian community because it targets them primarily as well as other ethnicities. So we're firmly against Proposition 16.
Okay, Susanna, would you like to add anything to that? Oh.
Yeah, like Mr. Bradley said, it's reversing the laws that we already have in place. So it permits the government. Once again, we want little government intervention as much as we can. And when government's constantly, telling us who we can hire, where we can make these decisions, it takes more and more of our freedoms away. So we are opposed to Proposition 16.
Yeah, we believe in less government. The government overreach is beyond the pale now. You've seen it in your taxation base, your regulations that we're faced with on a day-to-day basis as business owners.
Yeah, we have affirmative action amendment, so we have that, and it would totally repeal that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Proposition 15, it's about commercial property taxes.
Yeah.
This one is one of the most talked about in our community.
Mm-hmm.
Because many landlords are not even allowed to collect rent now, and they are even facing foreclosures. And yet, they want to double or triple their property taxes. What do you think about that?
No.
Firmly against it once and for all. Prop 13 was put in place for a good reason, is to protect our taxation base at time of purchase. The Prop 15 will adjust it to market rate. So what you paid when you purchased at 400,000, now the market rate being over 1 million, do the math. It's quite simple. It's unacceptable. And more importantly, this is just the beginning. We start with commercial property, then we go into our residential community properties. So we're firmly against this, firmly against it.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. Proposition 14, bonds for stem cell research.
So we just recently had 2 doctors who specialize in this area, and they are already using our fat stem cells to rejuvenate and to heal our body, our own fat cells. And the FDA is trying to make it illegal, that our fat cells do no longer belong to us. We don't need any more government in stem cell research. We have researched it to death. We know that our own stem cells can heal our bodies with a number of doctors that we have spoken to. This bill here authorizes over $5.5 billion state bonds for stem cell and other medical research, including training, research facility construction, administrative costs. You know about administrative costs. Everything seems to be hidden under administrative costs. It dedicates over $1.5 billion to brain-related diseases. We have, there's so much money that is going into all of these studies, and they are wanting to continue to take from taxpayers. So Prop 14 would allocate a total of $7.8 billion that this state cannot afford due to the current economic environment that we're in. This proposition would also be funding state agency that already received $3 billion back in 2004 for stem cell research. Where are we now? And there has been little to no actual results from this agency. More in the stem cell research and not being fully is also, as a point, is fully funded by the federal government and private enterprises. So why do we taxpayers have to lay out additional funding for this? We absolutely say no, and we oppose this Proposition 14.
Very well said, Susan.
Transparency
is what we're looking for. We're not seeing any transparency in some of these bills. So knowing that there's been quite a few billions of dollars already set there, we don't know where those monies went, and we're not sure what stem cells are using. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. Now, let's go to the measure. Measure RR, which is on page 2 of the ballots. It has to do with the school upgrades. Would you comment on that, please?
Yeah, Measure RR is a massive increase of debt to the LAUSD, about $7 billion in borrowed money, bonds for school construction. It will add new charges to your property tax bills, and there'll be no exemptions for seniors and low-income families. Measure RR will cost the owner of the home assessed at $500,000, an estimate of $108 per year, adding up to more than $3,800 by the time the bonds are fully paid off. In addition, Measure RR would authorize the district to seek waiver of its debts limited so it can borrow more than the law allows. That's 2 good reasons. The borrowed money of Measure RR could only be used for buildings, not for instruction, which we need. So hopefully, were there any more propositions we want to go over, or is that it?
No, but we will continue.
Well, you know, Mr. Bradley brought up the homeless crisis just now, and so I don't want to leave you with the homeless crisis. We actually have some very amazing programs that we have put in place with people like you who are helping us come up with some fantastic ideas. And so we have these solutions. Some we have to give credit to one of our former running mates who ran against Ted Lieu, Dr. Ken Wright, and a great strategy and idea for especially the mentally ill. And then also some young entrepreneurs who have come up with ways to help the artists in our community find rents that are affordable so they can continue to move forward with their dreams.
I did see one of the questions in the comments section about Prop 22. That's very important. That's called the gig bill. That's this is our proposition to stave SB 5, which is the job killer for self-insured, self-employed, people who work from home, the gig workers, the independent contractor, truckers, and such. So 22. That's a big, big yes. It's stopping the, allowing the gig workers to actually function. So where this bill, SB 5 started, we're stopping that with Proposition 22. So vote yes on Proposition 22.
Oh, thank you. Yes, that was one of the questions that I had on the agenda. So can you tell us what happens if Proposition 22 does not pass? Does it mean that we have to pay more for the Uber and Lyft every day? Because a lot of people have been just using Uber and Lyft rather than, you know, owning a car anymore. And they've been using it on a daily basis, going back and forth to work, the parking, going to the gas stations. So if this does not pass, does it mean that we're gonna have to pay more for Uber?
No, it means that you're going to lose Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, any of these great entrepreneurial ideas that they've brought to our communities. But James,
the state.
So if we want to keep it going, we need to say yes.
We need to say yes on 22.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Mr. Bradley, could you also tell us if people can take their ballots and drop it off at the polling stations, and do they have the option to surrender their vote in the polling station on the day of the election, or you know how early they can go into those polling stations? And also, today was the last day to register online. Till what time can they still register online? If we don't register online today, can they still register and vote at a polling station?
The answer is yes to all the above. We do have till midnight tonight to register online, so we can actually receive a ballot in the mail, and we can surrender. I always suggest that everyone, to avoid confusion or potential fraud, because we've seen with the ballot harvesting and all of a sudden ballots go missing. You've heard that story across the nation. Is if you would want to surrender your ballot at the polling station, hand it to them, and you vote with machine. Machine is almost instantaneous. They update those results every 10 minutes to the Secretary of State. Let's say you don't register tonight, you want to register between now and election day. Even on election day, your vote will be called the provisional ballot. It will be one of the very last to be counted, but it is still legal and you still have an opportunity to cast your vote. However, keep in mind, this in the 2018 election is where myself and a few other that were running for office were, there was quite a bit of voter fraud. So be mindful of that. But I suggest for your own personal reasons is to register if you can this evening, receive that ballot, carry it in if you can. If you don't, just drop it off in morning. Well, I just carry it into the.
You know, if I may add, James, also, if you are going to show up at the polling center to vote, please make sure that you write on your ballot surrender on every single page, or even go ahead and mark it all out. Mark it. Mark who you're going to vote for so that they can't make any changes. But you certainly want to put surrender on each page and then go into the polls and vote there. Donald Trump has went as far as saying, you know, please, if you're going to take your ballot to the registrar's office or to where you believe is a secure place to drop it off, or God forbid, he doesn't want it mailed, but if you do mail it, show up at the polling center and see if your vote, if your ballot has been processed yet. If it has not been processed, since you had mailed it in or dropped it off, then you get to go vote again in the polling center. Something has gone wrong with your ballot. There's also on lavote.com, you can actually register your ballot and you can track it wherever it goes, and obviously to its final destination. But this time, this is so serious that we need to know where our ballot is going.
Yeah, it's lavote.net. LAvote. Yeah.
Jeez. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bradley. Okay, now I'm glad you touched on the homeless situation, because that was one of the, on my agenda. Regarding the homeless situation, it's been me and many people's passion for many years. Mr. Bradley, would you tell our audience, what is your vision to solve the homeless situation? If you are elected, do you think one of the ways to solve this crisis would be creating large 24-hour community centers where the homeless people can live, work, get trained, receive health care until they can get back on their feet or live as long as they want, just like the ones they've had in Israel for many years, kibbutz? Would you consider putting this on a ballot on the next election?
I love the kibbutz concept. I do believe there's a lot of merit to it, and it's worked quite well in Israel. So so everyone can have an idea, I've spent the last almost, not quite 2 years, but understanding the issue that we have here in the county of Los Angeles. We're well over now, almost 67,000 homeless. 67. 4,500 of which are homeless veterans, and I being a veteran, that's a big concern. So we've talked with many agencies out there, great community-based solutions, one being Haven House, and Susanna can speak to another great program out there. The kibbutz, I love that concept. And why I do is because it complements with Dr. Kenneth Wright, his idea about repurposing the USC, was the hospital, I believe, right, Susanna?
Yeah, LA County USC is wide open because it's not retrofitted. So if you've ever watched General Hospital, the soap opera, do you remember when it comes up, General Hospital? That's the hospital, that's LA County USC, and it's massive, and it's sitting wide open. The dorms that used to house the doctors and the nurses are sitting wide open.
So you have a one-stop shop, you have detox rehab, you have rooms that they can actually occupy while they're going through detoxing or some therapy. And there also, we can work with, oddly, unions. They can come in and they do some training to outfit them, give them the qualifications to work for a union job, albeit that I'm union friendly, but not much. But this is one way to work across the aisle, correct? The kibbutz. People talk about the high desert, setting up villages. Great concept. But can we send those that need the health, the medical care that we're speaking of, that the USC systems could handle? So it could be a collaborative approach, because we look at everything. We look at the best ideas. We're working together. The kibbutz, boom, there. We have USC. We can put them through there, do the detox, get them out into the desert or wherever. But the whole concept is to get them out of harm's way. The liberal laws have caused this. We have people put on buses from Colorado, Idaho, with $100 in hand, said, go to Venice Beach, go to Skid Row, they love you there. You got everything set. So they get on the bus, they show up, and there they are on this downward spiral into becoming a John or Jane Doe. So we do have solutions. That's the point. We do work in a collaborative fashion. We love great concepts, like you mentioned. This is the beginning of one of the many solutions to end the homeless crisis in our county, in our state, and this could be the footprint or the pilot model to take across the nation. Did you want to add?
Yeah, if I may, James, thank you. So what I love about the James Bradley campaign solution to this is, as Mr. Bradley had mentioned, is that you have LA County USC wide open. You can triage people there, and if the mentally ill need a little bit more time, there are the dorms there that can house them. And then you have the military bases. Some of these military bases are sitting wide open. You can take some of those individuals to the military bases and incentivize these companies, these large companies, to bring their innovative ideas and vocations to the homeless, because each and every person needs to be handled respectfully, empathetically, and individually, because a mentally disabled homeless person is not the same as a mother who is on the streets with her children, and it's not the same as somebody who just cannot afford the rent anymore, or divorce. That's why we have to understand each individual's reason for being homeless empathetically and respectfully, so that we can help solve each and every one individually. I mean, for example, James, you could even talk about the disabled veterans homelessness, and how Mr. Bradley's been spending over a year trying to help fix this issue that Ted Lieu has totally turned his back on. James?
Yes. Oh, yes. Of course, I get a little emotional about it, being a veteran. I spend my weekends there trying to understand, and more importantly, being of some effective use or utility for those veterans out there that gave their all for our nation and are treated as the enemy. So I won't go into deep. We actually submitted some compelling evidence to the DOJ and FBI on the crimes against the veterans at the LA Soldiers Home. But I like to talk about the triggers from there's many issues around the homeless, and some of these triggers are simple increase in life expenses for some of these folks that are renting, those life-changing events, divorce, a death in the family. And why I bring this up is that's the beginning part of a homeless crisis, someone being evicted. Programs to deal with every aspect in the life cycle, or in some cases death cycle, of the homeless is paramount. No one's approaching it with a comprehensive solution. We're doing this. We're putting these programs for our homeless veterans. We're doing it for the homeless in general. The whole idea is to remove them off the street, get the needles, get the feces off, getting back to our life that we once enjoyed. We have solutions, and we're putting them into effect as of today. We're not waiting.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. Mr. Bradley, we in California, we pay high state income taxes, but other states such as Arizona, Texas, and other states, they don't even have state income tax, but they also have less crime and less homeless people. What is your opinion on that? Why is it that even though we are paying much more income taxes, but we have more crimes and more homeless?
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy where you feed a system through a taxation base that feeds these cottage industries within, population centers have always been known for high crime rates. People that have done well, they're targets. Unfortunately, that's the reality that we live in because we live on the coast. Those that have no income tax are usually mid-state, Wyoming, Idaho, and a few others. A little bit different lifestyle in general. But when you get around those areas like New York City, coastal regions that are highly sought after worldwide, that's where you have that competition, you have more crime, you have higher taxes that in some cases support the crime. Because if you always follow the money, that's what I always say, follow that money, you're gonna find corruption, you'll find the motives. And unfortunately, this happens to be an epicenter of corruption, LA and San Francisco.
Mr. Bradley, we also have some questions that are coming.
Sure.
Let me go to the one of our participants is asking about Proposition 19.
Mm-hmm.
Says, would you please elaborate why you don't support Prop 19 as it helps homeowners over 55 to transfer property taxes to replacement residents?
Go ahead, Susanna, and I'll join.
Sure. So the reason why we're opposing this, it allows homeowners who are over 55, disabled or wildfire disaster victims to transfer primary residence tax based to replacement residents, changes taxation of family property transfers, and establishes a fire protection services fund. So Proposition 19 makes property tax protections more portable but less heritable. Will lower your taxes if you move, but potentially raises them for your kids. Mm-hmm. When they inherit your home, effectively eliminating Proposition 58, Proposition 19 also eliminates a similar measure, Proposition 193, which gives the same protection to transfer between grandparents and grandchildren if the children's parents are deceased. Does that make a little bit more sense?
And what that does, it brings up that property value to the present day value. So that's the key. It's just like Prop 15. And so we got to be really careful about these propositions. It may seem, it's kind of like a wolf in lamb's clothing or sheep's clothing. This is one of those that'll come back to bite your children or your grandchildren.
Okay, Mr. Bradley, a couple of more questions. One of them is from Michelle. She really wants you to answer, talk about proposition regarding the stem cell. Mm-hmm. And she's interested in voting for that. And also she's asking, why are the voting posts so far from our homes?
Good question.
They are voting to avoid the fraud.
Well, I think Secretary of State Alex Padilla, and you know that they did this mail-in ballots. That's really what, on the heels of the pandemic. Some say it was planned. Some say it's just purposely positioned for voter fraud. What they normally do, in fact, you can go on lavote.net and you can get a listing of all the voting polling stations. So I think it's number one you should do. If you haven't already, do that. But the little background history behind why there's less as opposed to more, they moved everything, or trying to move everything into mail-in ballots.
And if I may also address Michelle's question with regards to stem cells, yes, the Republicans are voting against it because they believe that we're focusing on embryonic, right? Embryonic stem cells. We're talking about, there are doctors like Dr. Berman in Beverly Hills, Dr. Lander, Dr. Christine Kamala, who they are pioneers in this industry. They are using your own stem cells, your own what's called your fat cells. And they're using those as your stem cells for neuropathy, for paralysis, for various issues, back pain, knee injuries, concussions. They're using your own cells, which we now have to fight. I'm introducing James to this fight as well, to go to Congress and let them know that our cells belong to ours. I think the phrase was, my cells, my choice. If I want to use my cells to cure my body from certain ailments and diseases, I want to be able to do that and not go to the synthetic stem cells out there from the big pharmaceutical companies who are charging $1.2 million per vial. So it's very lucrative for big pharma to sell us synthetic stem cells instead of using our own. So the Republicans are against the embryonic stem cells, and they still need to be educated on being able to use, and this is pretty much a pioneer, our fat cells, yeah.
Right.
Does that make sense, Michelle? I hope that makes sense.
Well, let me add to it. This is clearly a financial play too. There's two books in California, the real books and the cookbooks, as we know of in finance. The cookbooks, the real books that they're trying to claim that we're only 54 billion, it's much more in the whole. Now, with that said, do we need to raise any more taxes for something that's already been subsidized by the federal government and private enterprise coming out of our coffers? No, we do not. We don't need another $7.8 billion coming out of our taxpayers' funds. Let's focus on recovery. Let's get people back to work. Let's re-energize our businesses again. That's why we're saying no on 14, because it's already been done. So that's why we're against 14.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bradley. I have one more question. Sid is asking, how can, I know you might have answered this, but would you please, answer it again? How can the city poor maintenance and rundown on the homeless can be addressed?
Oh, can you ask the question once again? Did you get that?
Sure. Go ahead.
I understand what you're saying. I mean, if you look around, wow, we're looking like we're moving more to a third world country than the United States of America. What has happened to our district in such a short amount of time? We need to be able to turn this back around. And James, I mean, just look at it. The homeless crisis is metastasizing, and that's what I'm saying. Look at our cities. They're, again, like I said, they look like third world countries. Hey, how are we going to address this is basically the question.
Oh, yeah. Well, first and foremost, there is a vagrancy law that we can employ. That means everyone off the street. Now, what we do in the federal government, we have a good program. We have funding. And that funding can, when you control the purse strings that you do in Congress, you control a lot of the pawns and the city officials. You're saying we have a certain set aside, but you need to adhere to the bill as written. So that's going to trigger the vagrancy laws, put them in effect. And more importantly, it's you, the voter, complaining, saying, we're done with this. And as I have, and as Susanna has, a lot of folks in Brentwood and Venice Beach, they're done with it, because Venice, if you've been to Venice lately, it's insane. It's like overcome by the homeless encampments.
The pollution. I mean, we are polluting our cities, and we need to take pride in our cities again. And we're seeing a lot of the pollution happening from, and again, not picking on the homeless, but where the homeless are, the encampments, the litter is just piling up. And then you're going to have rat infestation and all of that. So all that needs to be cleaned up. We need to go city by city, talk with these the residents, not the politicians, the residents. What do we need to do to clean up our individual cities, keeping our waterways clean, like James has talked about? He's also loves the environment and is out in the environment always.
Yeah, I'm a Coast Guardsman, that's why.
Yeah, are keeping our beaches clean, our waterways.
Well, Mr. Bradley, Susanna, and Mrs. Azizadeh from Iranian Jewish Federation, I want to thank you all for organizing this Zoom event. And just please, everyone, be sure to vote and ask your friends to vote. Good night.
Good night.
God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Don't forget to join our program next week, Tuesday, 27th, with Dr. Tabatabai about US elections and Iran relations. Thank you.